So we got about like 2 minutes before I'm gonna start this, but I can just ask y'all some questions too, and we can just talk about like what this is gonna be like. And I'm wondering, do any of y'all have experience with fermenting, or maybe what an interest or draw would have been to coming out about it?
Well, so yeah, I'm just interested in some fermenting. I like growing and doing anything. And so then it's coming to the end of the year, whether it's for gardening, I've got way too many things and, been getting into mushroom cultivation of every possible type of mushroom imaginable. So that means I've got a lot that I need to sit there making the tinctures or this, that, and another too. And so lately, I've actually heard and seen a couple of people on like Instagram and stuff posting and talking some more about koji and things like that. And I love any type of Asian style cuisine where those aren't used. And so as soon as I saw that this box was offered, I've been waiting to learn a little bit about it. So that's just sad to be here.
My wife's Korean. So, this is a way of life.
Thanks very much, Anjo.
Gonna be moving back to South Georgia to the land where I grew up, and I guess I didn't appreciate it as a kid. We have like 11 acres and we have all these trees and all this land to use for whatever it is that I chose, and so I've gotten into like concepts of like growing things, making things, and took some beekeeping classes, and they talked about the benefits of using certain types of mushrooms to aid the immune systems of the bees. So that led to me taking information in about mushroom cultivation and all that kind of stuff. And if I can grow mushrooms off of the logs that we have to manage the land of the yard, surely there's other things that can be made from those mushrooms aside from the medicine from the bee hive. So the word about it.
Yeah, I can like forage chanterelles pretty much year round down there.
What was that?
Yeah, I can forage chanterelles pretty much year round down there.
Yeah, it was a lot of the information that I've been getting is like the climate is much different and gives a lot more benefits. Like there's a few positives of doing mushroom cultivation up here and foraging up here, but like there's just a lot more time. There's a lot more time down south because it's just
And I think I actually met you at a Maine mycological parade, and so I recognized your name, and figured I'd check this out. And also, I just, I love the products that Koji makes or goes into, and food obsessed. So, learning more about it, and also I was in the wine business forever, so also the other fermented products that's the basis for, and even still spirits like the Batavia rack starts with koji for the fermentation before you distill the spirits. So there's just a zillion things, vinegars, whatever. So even though I've only dabbled in fermented, making my own, make my own koji and things like that.
I make beer for a living, and my son is sort of up and coming in the restaurant business. So we want to do some fermentation stuff at home. Different. He's obsessed with that Noma book, their fermentation program. So so we're going to play around with some stuff at home.
Yeah, that Noma book's pretty good, and they have a pretty good setup for growing koji in there. It's a nice setup where you can actually produce a decent amount.
Which book?
Noma's Guide to Fermentation. There's another book I recommend. It's Miso Tepe Nato, I think, or Miso Nato Tepe. I always forget. The authors of that name is Shaki. And they have a simpler koji setup, and I like the way they explain koji in their book better because it makes it feel more accessible. Those couple, Shakis is their last name, they have a lot of fermentation books out, and I really like them as food authors.
Do you know how to spell the author's name?
Shockey. They got a cider book that's really good, making her ciders. You got a bunch of vegetable fermentation books, but Miso Tepe Nato, I think is the name of that book. And that covers a lot of like bulk ferments. Tempeh is also another one that I don't work with, but it's a fungus ferment that does a really good job transforming food. But yeah, those are some good books. There's a lot of resources out there, becoming more and more. So it's getting easier to find the information now. When I started doing what I do, it was hard to find the information outside of Japanese texts. I can talk a little bit about who I am if you're not really familiar, and what I've been doing, and then we'll start talking about. This is like most of my meanderings of yesterday. I think I didn't make these yesterday, but I did a lot of like playing around with mushrooms yesterday, and it's something that I'm heading to. But my name's Nicholas Repenning, and if y'all don't mind, I'm just gonna sit down, and there's a couple of us here, so interrupt me, ask questions when you need to. And I'm co-founder of a fermentation business called Going Fermented Foods. We make miso here in Maine. If you try to find our products in stores right now, good luck. Been sold out of things for a little while. I will have miso in stores in about 3 weeks. So there's a store in town here called Ongi. It's a fermentation store on Washington Ave, and they carry a lot of the stuff I don't sell in other places. So a lot of like my small batch stuff and things like that will show up at their store.
What's the name of that store?
Ongi, ONGGI, or GIE, or GII?
ONGGI.
ONGGI, yeah. I remember how to say it. And if your wife's Korean, there's a Korean American couple that run that, and they've got some like really nice products from Korea that like you're not gonna find in a lot of shops. You have like good fish sauce, and but yeah, they curate a really beautiful selection of products. So they're someone that we partner with a lot in selling some of the stuff that I make. But mostly I make miso. That's what I'm most known for. And is everyone familiar with miso?
Only in the culinary sense, eating it, I don't know much more about it.
Yeah, so miso, just real quick of it, is a fermented seasoning, all-purpose seasoning. And it, for people who aren't familiar, I say it's like soy sauce but thicker. It's not bad at all, but it's similar in some ways. And you were talking about doenjang. So that would be like the miso kind of, right?
Yeah, it's the same.
In making doenjang, this is a Korean version of miso, if you want to say it that way. And when they do that, they're actually making the soy sauce and the doenjang at the same time. It's a different process. But to make miso, I make miso because I married a woman from Japan, and we couldn't find a miso that she liked. Not one that would meet her like regional taste. So we started making miso for us so that I could feed son's mother, and we could eat at home. I could keep her in this country. But we started making that at home, and then that expanded out, and it got a lot bigger. But to make miso, the first step of that is making something called koji. And koji is really what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the miso process a little bit, but really what I'm here is to talk about koji, which is a filamentous fungi, commonly known as a mold, and it's aspergillus, and mostly people know it as aspergillus oryzae, which means aspergillus rice. So it's the aspergillus that grows on rice. And there's a few different strains of aspergillus that are used in Japanese fermentation and these types of food fermenting. But we're just gonna basically all call it the same thing for simplicity. So koji is a mold that I grow on rice, and it takes about 48 hours to culture out on the rice. I do that in a controlled environment. There's a little bit of manipulation that happens in the process, but koji is known for making things like soy sauce, miso, sake, rice vinegar. Mirin is like a rice cooking wine. That's like a couple of stages of using koji of that. There's a bunch of other ones you might not know. Amazake is one. Amazake is actually like halfway to sake. It actually translates to sweet sake. Welcome.
Sorry.
We're just getting started, so no worries. And I didn't bring any of that today. I was like feeling lots of jars, but I made some hamazakis. So that's like a sweet rice porridge, basically, but it's halfway to sake. If you cut that in half with water, you're onto a uchi sake. You can make it less uchi, but just real simple. That's another one. Shio koji is something that it's been emerging lately, and this is shoyu koji. And these are just koji absorbed in a liquid substrate. So a lot of these things here, I'm actually utilizing something called shio koji, where it's just koji in salt and water, or in salt water. This is just koji in a commercial commodity. I've talked to you about why I do that and what that is for me. And if your son's getting into the restaurants, the shio koji, that's like cheating in the kitchen. And like you can utilize it so quickly in so many different ways. That like any restaurants that start utilizing that just steps the game up on all your cooking. I can't cook at home without that. But the koji itself, that's what the commonality between all of these things are. When I'm growing koji, it's a fungus that I'm growing out on rice, and it can grow on a lot of different substrates. I know people that grow it on meat, and there's people doing like vegetable charcuterie with it. And you can grow it in Japan. It's grown on soybeans and wheat to make soy sauce. It's grown on barley in regions where that's a prominent grain. And it's grown on rice in a lot of ways. And most people are familiar with sake, in which case it's grown on rice. And we could I won't go too deep into any of those avenues. But koji itself, when I'm growing koji, I'm basically farming enzymes. And I'm going to utilize those enzymes for fermentation. And koji in Japan is considered a gift from the gods. It's just like really powerful food. And what it's really powerful at, it has a lot of health stuff that I probably won't talk about on camera too much. But it has the potential to do a lot of healing within your body. But koji itself, like it's this suite of enzymes, like there's not much that we know of that can grow the amount of enzymes that koji does. And depending on the temperature ranges that I grow it and for the length of time that I'm growing it, I can produce different enzymes. So if I'm making sake, I'm going to grow it in a way that I'm focused on the enzymes that can break down starches and sugars. When I'm making a miso or a soy sauce, I'm going to grow it in a way that focuses on enzymes that break down proteins and turn those into amino acids eventually. There's a couple steps along that route. But depending on how I grow the koji, I can produce different suites of enzymes. But they're producing all of these other enzymes. And I think it's something like 100 identified ones now, a little over maybe 120. I'm sure they've identified more, but it's kind of like if you don't know what to look for, how are you going to find it, kind of thing. But yeah, so that's like koji in a quick nutshell. But I like to let's step it back a little bit and explain enzymes. Do people understand how enzymes work? Basic understanding, some not at all. It's a complicated thing, and it was explained to me. I really grasped it about a year ago or 2 years ago. It was explained to me in a way that kind of blew my mind a little bit. Like it's just the stuff about koji. So an enzyme is basically a key, and that key can unlock a particular molecule. And that key will only fit into that particular molecule. So a protease is an enzyme that breaks down a protein. It will only fit into a particular type of protein. So when it does, when you apply the enzyme to a molecule, then it takes it and it opens it up and it breaks it down into a simpler form. So when I'm breaking down a bean or soybean when I'm making miso, I'm breaking the protein down, it opens it up to a peptide. And then there's this other enzyme, peptidase, that comes in and it opens up that peptide into an amino acid. And the amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. So it's just like enzymes, what they do is they just open things up and make them more available for use for other organisms or for whatever it is, whether it be a microbe, a human, plant, animal, whatever needs those molecules to build themselves. That's what an enzyme's job is to open those things up.
If you take a piece of bread and you chew it for about a minute, the enzymes in your saliva, it starts to taste sweet.
Yeah.
The enzymes in your saliva break the starches.
Yeah, your mouth is producing amylase. And like in ancient like Shinto practices, That's how there were like the shrine maidens that would make like the ceremonial sakes, and that's how they would do it. They'd like chew on rice, and then spit it into this vessel, and that would get locked away.
Yeah, it's like chicha.
It's like chicha. That's like a common one in Central South America where they do the same thing with corn. Because the enzymes in your mouth, like your saliva is producing these enzymes to break that down. And then you're just utilizing that to break it down. I make koji, so I don't need to chew all of my food quite so well. I actually let the koji chew it before I eat it. And sometimes for years. But what I was gonna say, one time I tried doing that. I tried chewing up, a ball of rice like this. So I was making koji and I had extra rice. I tried chewing it up and I spit it into a bottle and I tried making sake with that. It didn't work out so well. I recommend it just for the fun of trying to chew up that much rice. That's the enzymes basically explained. So in the sake, we're using those enzymes. We're producing amylase and a bunch of different types of ones that can break down the starches. We're using those to break it down into a sugar, and then we introduce a yeast, or if it might be present already, and then that yeast can eat those sugars, and they can transfer them out to alcohols. In the process of a miso, there's 3 different things that are going on. So I'm utilizing enzymes to break down the fatties or the oils in the soybean, and it breaks them down to fatty acids. I'm utilizing other enzymes to break down the carbohydrates, some in the bean, but mostly in the rice, in the koji itself that I'm putting in there, breaking those down into sugars or simple forms of sugar. And then there's yeast that are in there that come in. There's actually some yeast that are present on soybeans that make it through like hours of boiling. But they come in, they utilize those carbohydrates to create an alcohol actually in the miso. That's one of the stages happening. And then the proteins are being broken down too by other enzymes. And like we went through that, and that breaks it down to amino acid. And then the alcohol is mixed with the fatty acids, and they create something called an ester. Which is where your flavors and your aromas and then the amino acids break down, and they create umami. So we've heard the term umami, and I like to think about this a lot. It makes more sense to me. It's like umami is your body sensing amino acids, and amino acids are the basic building blocks of proteins. So it's your body sensing that this is what I need to build myself. So when you have that savory, like, wow, I want to eat more of that, it's your body actually saying, hey, like, I need those building blocks to build myself. So I like to think of umami as that like indicator that like this is something good for me. Guaranteed, like we've got things like MSG that were created to like do, it's a lab form of amino acid, and maybe that's not the best way, but and we have things like white sugar that trick us too.
You should find it actually, doesn't it?
And I eat what I want to eat. I don't really follow much of a diet per se, but I don't eat a lot of white sugars and I don't eat a lot of processed foods other than like multi-year processing. And I feel like I have a pretty good sense of what my body needs. So when I'm hungry for something, that's what I eat. But I think that fermented foods have trained me to trust my body in that way. All the microbes that are in all these things and all the things I eat, they're the ones in control here. And they're actually more of them than me, so I'll thank them for that. Real quick, we talked about koji, we talked about enzymes, we talked about the miso process. Real quick, does anyone have any deeper questions on any of those things?
I do. So you said that the process with miso, it creates alcohol.
It does create alcohol, but that alcohol is transformed.
I'm just curious, like I know when I buy miso in the store, it usually lists alcohol as an ingredient in it. Is that why? Is that where it comes from, or is it an additive?
No,
typically?
so if you have a pasteurized miso,
Yeah,
they're going to use an alcohol to preserve it.
I see. Okay.
But if your miso is alive and active, which if it's not pasteurized, then it's still a living system, then you don't have to worry about it going bad. You don't have to preserve it because it's preserving itself. It's alive.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, like all of us are alive. We don't have to preserve ourselves to keep ourselves fresh. And I like to think about that in fermented foods. And is that like, I kind of talk about it as like the zombification of your food. So we take these foods that have been killed and then we bring them back to life. We create an environment for life to exist again within them. And then it brings it back to life. And then when something's alive and thriving, when we're alive and thriving, we don't get sick that easily. You know, we can't be contaminated, or we can't have a pathogen come and take over our bodies because our bodies are protecting themselves. We're alive and thriving. And that's the same thing within a fermentation, is that when that fermentation is active, it's really hard for something harmful to come in and break it down. It's really harmful for, you know, diseases to get into a lot of our bodies if we're healthy and thriving and active. So I like to think about that with those foods. So when they killed the miso and then when they pasteurized it, they were like, okay, how do I preserve this? And they just put something in that would keep it from being able to be harbored by life, alcohol. Any other questions?
Is that the difference between the shelf stable miso that you buy and the ones that are in the refrigerated section?
My miso is pretty shelf stable, but I tell you have to put it in the refrigerator according to the label. I lost the label on this one actually. It was around when I made this. Is like in 2018. It's been sitting on my shelf for like, and this is mushrooms actually. They've been sitting on my shelf for a really long time. I've got misos that are like 10 years old. So
And live and just at room temperature?
they're fine. They've got a really strong biome. And it continues fermenting. So that fermentation process continues. The refrigeration, like some things, this one is got a lot of liquid to it, so there's a good chance that one could get sour on me, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But that's just like mushrooms in this stuff. This is called shoyu koji. It's gonna get active. I made this yesterday, so in a month from now, that flavor is gonna be like booming up out of it. But it's gonna get active. It's gonna change. So when your ferment is not in the refrigeration or not in like some kind of control like that, it's gonna continue to ferment. You put it in the refrigeration, and you're basically halting that process. So you just slow things down. So if I'm making something I really like where the flavor is, put it in the refrigerator. And then I know that it's not going to ferment too far past that.
So what's the difference between like a 6-month-old miso and a 10-year-old miso? Taste-wise?
Taste-wise? Well, it depends on the miso, really. So a 6-month-year-old miso, generally, if you're going to make one that's going to go 10 years, it's going to be a different recipe than one that's going to go 6 months. So the ones I would go 6 months on are sweet misos. They have a really low salt content. And those are finished in 3 to 6 months. Most of the miso I make finishes in a year. I like it at 18 months. At 2 years, it gets really dark. It gets more savory. It continues. At 3 or 4 years, I find that its activity kind of plateaus and it starts to come down. And this is another thing about enzymes. An enzyme will not expire. So like when I'm using the koji to make miso, the enzymes are still as strong in my finished miso after a year as they were when I put it in there. And that's because they don't expire as long as they don't have too much work to do, or as long as they still have work to do. So if you take enzymes and you put them into something, or you give them work to do, you give them stuff to open up and break down, they like the work. But if you give them too much work, they get kind of like overwhelmed and like burn them out because they want to work so hard. You know, it's like you have like way too much work, and you're like, I gotta get all this stuff done. You're gonna burn yourself out trying to do it. And I like reflect on all of this as like analogies to myself and my life, and I mean, it's all life. You know, we're just different types of organisms. But as long as the enzymes have work to do, they will keep functioning. They could potentially be perpetual. So they could potentially be perpetual foods, or perpetual keys in unlocking foods. But you just there's ways and means about that. They're using the medical industry at some degree like that. Some bandages and stuff that utilize enzymes in that way to break down the skin and help you heal and things like that. But at some point they get bored if they don't have enough work to do. So when I have a miso that's like you're saying you're getting like 3 or 4 years, I'm noticing like is about the time that it's starting to plateaus, and I haven't seen it go bad beyond that point. It just doesn't do it. Like, it's not pushing forward anymore. So those enzymes are starting to die back, and they don't have quite the action that they had when I first put them in. But at a year, at 18 months, they're actively moving. And then you can take that miso and you can marinate your meat with it, or marinate whatever vegetables. I eat a lot of meat, so I usually use miso to marinate meat. But you could do tofu, or even tempeh stuff, which is actually already like mold fermented like grains. And all the enzymes that were in there to begin with to break down the proteins in the soybeans are still present, and you can just take them and apply them to another protein, and it's going to continue to break that down. And then that's kind of like the idea around like what's happening. It's like we're just using enzymes, utilizing them. I farm enzymes, I take them, I put them on things, I see what happens. And I've been doing this for about I think about 10 years commercially. And I'm a really bad business person, just so you all know. So if you want to get my product, some of you might know it's hard to do if you've ever tried to track down some of my things. So you gotta come find me. And if you want to hear me speak, like good luck trying to find videos. I really hate making videos of things. Yeah, no, the one right there. I was thinking about that. I was like, I almost asked him not to turn it off. Because it's not my way. Like, I believe in the oral transmission of knowledge. And that's how humans have existed for millennia, is that we spoke something down to another person. Like, my experience is directly handed to you. And I'm happy to answer all of your questions. You can email me some questions. I'll probably get back to you. It'll take a long time. But I do believe in that oral transmission of knowledge. I think that's what we're meant to be in community, share things, get to know things together. And another note of good luck video people, I say a lot when I'm talking. Like I did some videos for someone recently, and they're like, say a lot. They'll have to edit a lot of that if they're really worried about it. And I'm bouncing all over the place, and that's just like how I'm going to have this conversation with y'all. So if you have any questions, throw them out left, right field at me, and then I'm happy to answer them. I'm going to start talking about utilizing these processes I just explained on musculodes. But do we have any questions before I go further into that?
If I want to make pizza, where do I get a koji strain that I know is koji and not some deadly thing?
You can buy koji out pre-made. I usually sell it. I'm making a batch in 2 or 3 weeks. You can get some from me. You can get some from a lot of places online. But if you want to grow your own koji, the spores you can get online. Gem Cultures is a company out on the West Coast, working in Washington, right there. I think they're in either Oregon or Washington. They've been bringing koji to this country for decades, and I appreciate them for doing that work. You might have to like send them a check in the mail. But there's a lot of different places. I get mine direct from spore producers in Japan, which there's about 7 or 8 big spore producers in Japan. All of their kojis have different personalities, which I appreciate. I get them from some folks they're called Akita Kono, Kita. Akita is the prefecture, the area where they are, and Kono, Konno. I like their spores. They've been producing them for about 100 years. There's another company called Bioc, BIOC, and I think they sell in the US now. There's a business on the West Coast, an Amadaki company that sells their spores. But I believe you can get Bioc directly now too. I used to have my partner's mom pick up the spore. We get them mailed to their house in Japan, and then they ship them to us, or they're the store. It's a lot easier to get them now. So if you want to grow your own koji, I recommend it. It's not that hard. It may seem kind of intimidating, but koji is really forgiving and really friendly mold. So
Pictures of it, can see where it's happening.
I can give you a card. You can check out my website. I don't bring pictures, like I said. We got a technology thing. We've got a technology block. And I'll have a bunch of cards I can just leave here. The koji is really fuzzy, cute mold. And Sepilomentis fungi, they're really tiny.
Grow it in a petri dish?
You could grow it in a petri dish. I've seen liquid substrates of it before, but I grow it on grains, and I like to grow it in trays. I grow it in cedar trays. That's how it was done traditionally in Japan. I use Maine white cedar for that, so I can get like that terroir of this place. And the white cedar actually has very similar compounds to the red cedar, which is actually what a lot of medicines are made in cedar. So the antimicrobial properties are very similar to, almost identical to red cedar. And they're not actually cedars. There's only, like, true cedars don't even exist in this country. I think the only true cedars are actually in this. So that was a nerdy rabbit hole I went down one day. But yeah, I grow koji in cedar trays. The cedar trays can absorb moisture in a really good way. Cedar does that, but also has a lot of antimicrobial properties. When you're growing koji, you're usually inoculating with enough mold spores that, like, so you're steaming your grain, steam the grain, and then as soon as it's cooled down enough that, like, a little above body temperature, as soon as it's cooled down enough that you can touch it, basically, then we inoculate it with mold spores. And there's like so much mold spores going on there that it's not going to matter. But when I'm steaming the koji, I'm doing it just below al dente. So the outer layer of the rice grain is actually too hard for a lot of bacteria to, like, take hold. They can't access the water, but the fungus can. So the fungus can access. The fungus need less water to start to grow, and then they can start to drill their hyphae into the center of the grain. And as they do that, they can reach the moisture on the center of the grain. But it takes a long time for bacteria to do that, and the bacteria will actually follow those mycelial roots. They do that in all fungi. It's like the bacteria change will follow behind what the fungus didn't eat. So it's like they come behind and they're like, all right, well, you left some of that, and they're still utilizing the enzymes that fungus didn't. And that happens in the ground and trees and food substrates and whatever. They found that a lot of times those bacteria will follow behind. I can get a little mystical on you too with the koji, which is kind of how I look at it anyway. And it's just like real powerful, like light. Like it's got a lot of like really beneficial energy to it, and it attracts microbes that are similar. It attracts these things that want to thrive. They want the system to grow and enhance itself. And it's just, I think that it's a really high level medicine. And that's what they say about miso. Like after World War II, like a lot of people, like in the hospitals where they were dealing with, people from the bombings in Japan. The doctors fed their nurses miso soup and seaweed, and they didn't get radiation sick. And they pretty much blamed it out on miso. You can chelate heavy metals. Obviously, you can work out radiation and things like that. And I also heard some stories about this one sake brewery near Hiroshima. I really like this one. Is that like when the bombs hit, they just started drinking it. And just like, I mean, it's over. Like, we're just gonna, might as well get drunk, I guess. And none of them got radiation sickness. Because they were drinking raw sake, which is like just koji. It's koji and yeast and some other bacteria at that point. But they're drinking this stuff. And that's not miso per se. That's just the koji and alcohol. But they were drinking that raw, so they were still getting all those enzymes, they were getting all those bacteria and things that lived in there. And that protected them somehow. Yeah, I think it's enough ranting about koji as I'm going to do right now. Any other questions to any of that stuff?
Not great.
What?
So you Right, what kind of rice?
I use a short grain white rice, so like a sushi green rice. And I use that because that's traditionally used in Japan. Some people use basmati rice. There's different structures, different sugar structures in there, and that's been really popular. But apparently, that's supposed to work a little faster. I'm really interested in working more with barley because the barley grows here in Maine. I'm thinking about using corn more because the corn is a traditional grain of this country and this land, so it's traditional peoples here. I'd like to honor that a little bit, but it's also like just a really good way to go being where we are and give corn a better name. Yeah.
If you were using corn koji, would the corn kernels themselves break down even in the
I think the corn kernels themselves will break down. It depends on what type of corn you're using, but it will break down eventually. And then if you're using like a flint corn or something like that, I think you have to nixtamalize it first. I've heard of people not doing that, but I've heard more people nixtamalizing it first. So nixtamalizing, if you're not familiar, is a process to break the corns down so that our bodies can digest it. So some flint corns and like more complex corns need to have that process done first. It's not your normal like sweet corn or something like that. But you could grow koji on your normal corn too. Cultures Group, Ken, I don't know if he still has videos up about growing koji on corn, but he's always a good one to throw a note to. If you have some good questions, he's got a lot of experience with that. And that's Cultures Group. It's an online resource. They do a lot of fermentation events online, videos like galore. I just did an event with them not too long ago on mushrooms and koji. Oddly enough, it kind of inspired me to speak at this one. So, sorry, it's on purpose. Yeah, so I kind of explained the miso process. So, how can I use that on mushrooms, and what is that like? So, if anybody wants to give out some samples, you're welcome to come and try some things, or we can just try a bunch of stuff at the end. But if one of y'all want to, you're more than welcome to put some of these out for people. I'm gonna eat some right now. I'm kind of inspiring myself to talk to you. So, using that miso process with mushrooms. So I've done this myself. I've done it with matsutake, which I do a lot of wild foraging. So most of the mushrooms that I use are going to be wild ones. Although actually none of these are wild. I bought these yesterday. But this one is. So each mushroom is going to be different. But you can basically take that miso process, and then I take the bean out of the recipe, and I have to calculate what the finished amount of bean into the recipe is going to be. But I would have to go way into like miso stuff. But basically, take the amount of bean, finished cooked bean that would be going into the miso, and replace that with cooked mushroom. Guaranteed that the water contents of the mushroom are going to be a little more than they would of the bean, because when you rehydrate a mushroom, you're bringing back like 80 or 90% of the water back into it. So that's something that is going to affect it a little bit. And there's something called water activity. So bacteria, all life needs water to survive. It's our first medicine. Bacteria also needs water to survive. However, when you're making a ferment, then you're creating a system where your microbes kind of like come in and dominate, and there's so much of them that they exclude the other one. And we might be locking that water up with sugars, we might be locking that water up with salts, things like that. So there's something to think about when you're trying to make a mushroom miso, is that the water activity of mushrooms might affect the final outcome, which in my experience would make it a little sour. But this thing taught me, I just tasted it again the other day after a couple of years. That thing taught me that time will heal that too. But basically replace the beans for mushrooms. Different mushrooms, different types of treatment. You can do it with raw mushrooms, and this is the question that I've been asking and haven't been able to get answered because there's not many people doing mushroom misos. There's a few people, but I want to use the raw mushrooms because I want the microbes that exist on the mushrooms and the ones that create that system that help them thrive. I want to utilize those too. And I like wild fermentation more so than having to cook things. However, the cell walls of the mushrooms have tightened. So I'm not totally sure if the koji produces chitinase, so the enzyme to break down that. But the koji is also a fungus, and every one of us has everything we need within our body to break ourselves down. So when we died on the floor right here, and no one did anything to us. We would rot because our body has everything that it needs to break itself down. So I'm pretty sure that the koji fungus should have that. And then other funguses actually produce this enzyme to fight back competing fungus as well. So there's a competing fungus, and we're talking in the mushroom realm now. Fungus is a pretty broad world. But if there's a competing mushroom, sometimes the mushrooms will produce chitinase to break down the other mushroom that's attacking them or coming into their space. But I'm pretty sure koji does produce it. But if it does not, when you're making a miso with mushrooms and you're using fresh mushrooms that haven't been cooked, the microbes that are available in that process, I believe, are the ones that actually produce the chitinase or chitinase, however we say it. I'm not really sure. And that's something that I'm thinking about. And that's just like this really nerdy technical piece that is kind of important to understand when you're trying to ferment mushrooms. Because you have to break down those cell walls a little bit so that our bodies can digest them. So, because if you don't, that's just kind of bind you up and things like that. But also, I want to release all of the compounds that are in the mushroom. And that fermentation is just a process of utilizing, especially with koji, it's a process of utilizing enzymes to open up things. And then a lot of our mushrooms are considered really high medicines as well. So, how can I break that molecule open and make it more accessible to my body? A lot of times with mushrooms, we're using heat to do that. Let's see. This tastes good already, but I'm gonna let it go for like 6 months. This is my dake in here, or head of the woods. These are wild ones. And I'm gonna throw in some other bits of information as I go. But I took these were dried. I gathered these myself in the forest. These were dried. When you dry and rehydrate a mushroom, you're increasing its umami potential. In shiitake, I've seen the numbers on that. When they dry and then rehydrate it, and when you rehydrate it in cold water. Do it slow overnight or throughout the day. With shiitake, it increased its umami potential tenfold. So it increased its amino acid profile by tenfold when they dried it and then rehydrated it. Because the enzymes were still present on that thing. And like I said, everything has what it needs to digest itself. So the enzymes are still present and they're still breaking down the proteins of the shiitake as it dried. And as it rehydrated, they come back to life because they had water they could use. And life needs water. So they took that water and then they just started building it back up and they break it down really well. So when I'm using mushrooms from the wild, just for preservation point, I like to dry them and rehydrate them. And I like to dry them in the sun because they pick up a lot of vitamin D from the sun and they pick up a lot of nutrients from that. And that's just how they dry mushrooms in Japan too, and they've got a long history of working with mushrooms, so I'm just going to trust that.
But you stick them on a sheet in the sun, or how does that work?
Greg Marley spoke earlier today. I like what he says, most people in Maine have that little dehydrator out in the yard, that old car that has been sitting out there. So you can just put them in there, but any kind of solar dehydrator. I like the winds to be able to get them too. I would do drying racks and hang them out on the clothesline. They get blown around, sitting down. I've got these tiered drying racks. I got Chinatown somewhere. But the cannabis industry actually has a lot of that stuff too, and I think the mushroom industry too for drying out mushrooms, but I noticed the really nice ones. You get these big big discs like tiered drying racks that people would use for growing cannabis. And those work really good for drying out mushrooms or your herbs or whatever you need to. I mean, they're made to dry herbs. Um, but I'm sure that there's something like that for the mushroom industry as well. I'm not really sure.
So the car works.
Yeah.
When you're doing like maitake or head in the woods, that can be a huge mushroom. Do you have to deprocess them all before you dry them, or do you dry them whole?
Well, I'll go back to maitake in particular. So with the maitakes, I will break them apart. I'll clean. I'm getting them from the wild, so I'm cleaning all the needles and dirt and bugs and all that stuff out of there. And I rip them. I don't like to cut them. I like to rip them. And then I'll dry them out in the smaller pieces. And like yeah, that could be a huge mushroom. Like sometimes like I've found ones that are like 50 pounds, like big. And the core of that might be a little bit too hard. But you can still dry that out, powder it, and then use it as a seasoning in soups and stuff to bring more flavor too. But I would take the fronds of everyone familiar with hen of the woods or maitake. It's kind of they call it the dancing mushroom. That's what maitake means actually, dancing mushroom. This has got its hands up. And I'll take it, I rip it into smaller pieces, and I dry it out, and then I'll just store it. And then when I rehydrated it, and then I actually saved that water that I rehydrated in case I need to add a little later. And then I like to steam them. I have roasted them too at that point. I made like a pate with koji and things, which is kind of similar to this. But I roasted it that time. But you want to bring that, and I think with the maitake in particular, you need to cook them for a certain amount of time, just for the fermenting process. I know some other dishes where like it's necessary to cook them ahead of time before using them in the dish. Cooking beans when I'm making miso, cooking mushrooms beforehand, you're denaturing proteins, but you're also breaking down those cell walls a little bit so that we can access it a little easier. So we'll talk about this one. I took my maitake, they were dried, I wrapped them all up, dried them on a rack in the sun. I rehydrated them all. I took them all, after I rehydrated them, I steamed them all. And then I put them through a food processor, blended them all up, and then I mixed them with shio koji, which is koji in a salt brine. This is a shio koji with candy cap mushrooms, but basically it would look similar to this. It's just koji in a salt brine, so it's an enzyme solution, basically. And in the past, I actually did the miso process. So I'm adding koji, I'm adding salt, I'm adding mushrooms instead of beans, and then I let it ferment. Let it go for 6 months, a year, something like that. I've noticed that it's a different protein, sure, than it is in the pea. The maitake has a really high protein value. I want to say it's in like the 30% or more. But it didn't give me this like deep umami that I was looking for. And I talked to someone, and this is just like product development research. If anybody wants to get into making mushroom miso, we'll give this a good notes right now. My friend recommended bringing beans in actually too. Maybe not soybeans, because a lot of times people are allergic to soy or averse to soy. But you can bring in something else for that to match that umami to bring out other things. Black turtle beans would be a good one. They're also really high protein. But yeah, basically take that miso process and apply it to mushrooms. I got a bunch of other things here though. This is like so roasted cacao, pine pollen, porcinis or Boletus edulis, and then the syrupores, palates. The dried saddleback. And then I took all of those things, I cooked them down together, and then I mixed shio koji with it. And just mixing the shio koji is a new method that I'm playing with right now. Like all of my fermenting mushrooms is totally experimental. Most of it's in here. But I'm gonna let this go for a while, and it's like pretty liquidy. Like when I'm making a miso, I want it a little thicker. But I'm pretty sure I'm gonna let that go we're gonna start it at like 6 months. I'll check it. And based on how liquid it is, I think I'm gonna end up pressing it and making like a soy sauce, basically, out of that. This is the liquid, the tamari, so the liquid from a maitake miso that I made in 2019. And I found this bottle the other day, and I was like, oh wow, that's some of that too. That's really good. Go ahead and try it. This is the maitake, rehydrated. I cooked it with onions. And then I poured some of this. This is shoyu koji or tamari koji. This is koji in soy sauce as salt brine. This is like, I put that in burgers. I like that with tomatoes. I like that mixed with cooked maitake and onions. And like, the one I have at home is pressed down a little bit more, but I'm gonna let this ferment for a while. But I've just seasoned my mushrooms with this, which is gonna let it start fermenting, but it already tastes good. So like I've got it at a state where I can eat it. I could leave this in my fridge in like 6 months. I could still eat it. It'd probably be totally fine. I'm pretty sure of that. But I'm utilizing these seasoning techniques, and I'm taking them and I'm applying them to mushrooms.
This might be a silly question. Just something, I don't know if this is the way that this works. But as you use this, since it's a living system, can you add things back into it to replenish it, or is that like you do it by batches? Like how does that work? Like once you've used this jar up, is it just gone, or can you keep this jar perpetual?
With the koji, I like to make a new one. Okay. Like the enzymes in the koji, like I said, it could be a perpetual system, but there's a lot of other factors in play too. So I think there is a way to utilize it in a way that you could potentially do that, but there's an issue of the water that keeps being replaced. And then the micro communities that are growing in there. I think that in some ways the answer is yes. We can keep feeding it a little bit more. I could give it a little more enzymes once in a while, keep that going. I have this salsa in my fridge that was like 10 years old when I finally said goodbye to it. And every year I just bring like more peppers and more tomatoes, extra tomatillos and like that in this one. And I just kept feeding it. It's fermented. It just like lived in my fridge for most of my son's life. Like, when I had tacos, it's like, oh man, that sauce is old you up.
It's just like as what you want in it grows, so too will everything else that you don't want.
Maybe you do want some of those other things, but it's hard to control the community in that way. So I do these things, miso blends, and this is how I started using mushrooms in the miso. Is that I would take dried mushrooms, I would grind them into a powder, and I do one miso. I use hemlock and matsutake. So the matsutake mushrooms, technically not matsutake, but the matsutake mushrooms here grow under hemlocks. So Tricholoma magnifilaria is what it is, but it grows under hemlock trees. So I go in the fall and I gather all of those matsutakes and then I dry them out. And if you ever dried them out before, there's like real beautiful flavor from the dried and rehydrated ones that aren't there when they're fresh and resin. So I gather those and dry them out. In the spring, I go back to the same trees and I pick all the tips off the hemlock trees when they're nice and tender, and I mix all those into the miso. But I'm using dried mushroom that hasn't been denatured, it hasn't been cooked and broken down, and I'm putting that in there, and then guaranteed it's in an amount that your body's going to be able to like handle it. It's not going to like bind you up. But it does break it down over time. I've taken oyster mushrooms, I put them in shio koji, and I did this in my fridge, and I left them there, and after a year, there were no more mushrooms. It melted completely into this thing. It was a weird sauce, but not sure if I ate that. But either way, it was an experiment to see can the koji break down the mushroom, and it did. Like over time, it just melted the whole thing, and those weren't cooked; those were fresh. So that's the question of like, is it breaking down the chitinase or chitinase?
Do you always ferment these with the caps down like they don't need oxygen?
These are all anaerobic processes. So the oxygen is where I get the defect actually. So some of them I don't. Some of them I'll just weight down and let the liquid come to rise to the top of it, and that will protect it that way. The tamari is a product of when I make a miso, I weight it down And with the miso, okay, so like if you are gonna make mushroom misos, I do recommend you weight them down. Because there's something about the pressure as well. And as those microbes are growing, goes like this. The pressure helps to hold it down. It helps to keep the fermentation. It actually slows it down, I think, a little bit. But how energy moves like this within the vessel. And now we're getting all metaphysical on you again. But this is like a torus. This is this energetic loop that goes like this. So the energy within those vessels, and in Korea they ferment in ongis. Ongis are shaped like round like this for a reason. That's their version of a crock. But they're round like for a reason because it helps the energy to move. And like the shape of your vessel will affect the ferment. And that's just like me being a little crazy too. But I make stuff and people all say it's really good, so I must be doing something right. Any other questions? I'm
Yeah.
going all over the place on you.
Sorry, another rabbit hole. The handicap one that you have there, was that like locally foraged, like just Lactarius, like Capratus or something like that?
Those were candy caps from the West Coast.
Okay,
So those aren't from here. Ours here. Ones we have here don't have quite as strong of a flavor. They're more like mapley, like fenugreek.
yeah, super when you dry it.
Yeah. So I'm gonna put some samples out here and go and try some stuff, but we're gonna give you like a couple more minutes to ask me more questions. And then we have some time to sample stuff and talk about it when you can taste it, because I much more prefer being able to eat this stuff without the eyes. Everyone agree with that?
Yeah.
Alright, cool. And I'm gonna say that I don't have enough of these books for you to use them to sample your stuff. But I'm gonna put a bunch of sample cups out here in front of jars, and if one's not open, and if you want to know what it is, it's not all labeled. These are marinated shiitakes and shoyu, koji, rice vinegar, a little maple syrup, and amazake. Those ones are really nice. This one needs to fit, but it's kind of okay already. This maitake tamari, I'm gonna recommend if you want to try this, just take a dropper and get some in your hand. This is from 2019. Oh no. And you might have to serve yourself the samples because they didn't bring anybody.
So I don't suppose you have a book or an manual for this or anything.
I can direct you towards books and manuals.
I need instructions or else I can guess myself in there.
As far as the mushroom fermenting goes, like you just got the book. That's about.
No, yeah.
Hey, nice. Thank you for coming.
Something at.
Sandra Catson's got some good ones. So there's a book for growing koji. The book that one of my favorites is called Koji for Life. It's by a guy named Nakaji. Who's from Japan. Yeah, it's real short, and he covers like 3 things. And he's a Japanese fellow that teaches koji. And he's super knowledgeable. He used to be working in the koji room. He'd be a brewer at this natural sake brewery in Japan called Tarada Hongen, which is like one of the top like natural sake breweries. I think it is the top one in Japan. And their place is cool. When they grow their koji, they bring the rice into the koji room that they've been doing it in for 27 generations, and they let it out. And then for the first batch of the year, they just catch it from the walls, and then they test it and make sure it's what it needs to be, and then take all that, and that's what they use to make the sake that we do. But man, if you want explanations on any of this,
Yeah. That's how one singular entity can be pushed in so many different directions.
Yeah. I mean, koji's like, this is a rabbit hole. Sure, it's really hard for me to like do one thing. This is the maitake with shio koji. Actually, it's a soy shio koji. And so that's I made it yesterday. I'm gonna let it ferment for 6 months, but it already tastes good. And that's something that I've been doing. That my friend showed me was that like just taking mushrooms, grinding them down, and mixing them like a quarter to a half with shio koji or the shoyu koji. This is just the maitake with onions with this in it, and this is the shoyu koji. It's just koji in tamari. But if you just grind the mushrooms up, I mean, this is like real quick eating. You grind the mushrooms up and mix them with shio koji or shoyu koji at like a quarter to like half. And that's what this is. I think this was almost half.
It's very good.
And if you add some beans to that, you can get pasty and just have a good dip. But I'm gonna let that ferment for 6 months. And then this tamari is basically what that's gonna taste like. Because it's a little different. I made this more like a miso process, and that was just my maitake with shio koji added.
Do you do like 12%, or how much is yours?
I'm finding with the mushrooms, I want it to happen faster. So I think I'm gonna hold them at like 6 to 10%. I think I'm looking more at like the 6% because they're not getting this depth of umami that I'm really looking for. So I think that I think they'd be better off as a sweet so. And people really like the sweet.
So what is your when you make the shio koji? What's this? The salt content?
12%. And that's just like standard from Japan. I think that's kind of what they do there.
So you're doing like half shio.
Yeah, so this is a little bit less. So that one is around 6% salt. This one, I didn't measure anything with this one. I just
I'm making a mung bean miso right now.
Yeah.
And it has mold on it.
Did you weight it down?
No.
I recommend weighting them down. I usually don't teach weighting them down because I teach you in like a small jar, but it's a good way to go.
That's so good.
That's so good, isn't it?
Whoa.
What is that?
That's just the shoyu koji, and that's like the maitakes sauteed in sesame oil with some onions. And I didn't measure how much of that went in. I just made it. But I've got this. So the rest of that jar, I made a big jar of that. The rest of that jar has got a weight on it, and all that submerged